It's a great pleasure and honor to welcome Dr. Paul.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim, for that nice introduction. I'm very pleased to be here. I thank Cato for the invitation. I feel this is a real honor to be among many who are very well versed in this issue, so I'm very, very pleased to be here. You know, I've thought about and have written about the Federal Reserve for a long time. I became fascinated with the monetary issue in the 1960s, having come across the Austrian economists, and especially Hayek and Mises. And I was very impressed with August 15th, 1971, because the predictions made in the 60s came about. Matter of fact, Henry Hazlitt made that prediction in 1944 when they set up Bretton Woods. He said it wouldn't work and it would fall apart, and it did. So that was a strong confirmation. But even after all these years of studying and reading and trying to figure out the system, I have come to a very fair and balanced approach to the Federal Reserve. I think there's no doubt that the Federal Reserve is immoral, it's unconstitutional, and it's a disaster, and we don't need it. So with that approach, I have worked hard in the Congress as well, being on the Financial Services, or the Banking Committee at one time it was called. And from the very first day of being in Congress, I have always been on that committee, and now have the position of being the committee subcommittee chairman for domestic monetary policy. I've always worked on the assumption that the the system that replaced the Bretton Woods system in 1971 would not be a good system. It would be much worse. It has been rather impressive that it's lasted this long, but I think the handwriting's on the wall. I think that's what we're facing today, that the dollar reserve standard, which the world has embraced for 40 years, has come to an end. I don't think there's any admission to this yet, and they believe they can patch it up, but I believe it has ended, and that the standard, the dollar reserve standard, has ushered in probably the world's biggest financial bubble in all of history, and yet they've still been able to patch it up and keep it together. But it seems to me like the total weight of the world financial system relies on a trust, which is a false trust from my viewpoint, in the dollar, that the dollar will be able to rescue everybody and anybody, whether it's our own treasury, whether it's our state finances, whether it's our cities and towns and around the world, and all the banks and all the corporations. And so far, you know, this undertaking hasn't really destroyed the confidence in the dollar. I think one reason, when you look at the dollar in comparison to other currencies, of course, over a period of time, the value of the dollar has gone down. But there's still people buying dollars and loaning money to us at very, very low rates. But when you think about the comparison of the currencies, you have to think about what's our competition. And the competition is the euro and some others, so they're not necessarily very, very strong themselves. But when it comes to the purchasing power, which is the ultimate test of a currency, I don't think we're doing very well. Our government now admits that our consumer prices are going up approximately 4%, but if you use the old CPI, they're going up more like 8 or 9%. And if you compare cost of living increases for certain individuals versus others, it's much more painful. So if you're on Social Security, and this year they get a CPI increase, but a couple of years they did not, their standard of living has gone down, and it's been much worse for them. So if their cost of living is going down, going up, and their standard of living is going down, this is a reflection of the value of the dollar. But the Federal Reserve is an institution that was created by the Congress, and Congress has been totally derelict in their duties as far as oversight of the Federal Reserve. And I've argued this case along with many liberal Democrats over the years. Back there were some populists like Patman and Gonzalez from Texas, as well as even Henry Royce thought that there should be more supervision of the Federal Reserve. Their conclusions were different than mine because they didn't particularly argue for constitutional money and commodity money, but they argued that the Congress should have more authority, that the Fed shouldn't act in secrecy, and yet for 100 years they've essentially been able to act on their own. But I'm convinced that in these last few years we have made tremendous progress. Essentially since the collapse of the financial markets in 2008, we've gotten a lot more attention to the Fed. Last year, we had a partial audit passed into Congress. We're getting more information. Lawsuits have helped us get more information. And this, to me, is very beneficial. The audit bill was supported approximately a third of the Democrats, and every single Republican signed on to the audit bill. So there's a little bit of effort. But on the Hill, I would say that there's not a whole lot of enthusiasm for what I've been talking about, and there's a lot of political grandstanding, and you get some benefits. But where I get more enthusiastic is what's happening in the country, the attention of the people, and especially the young people I talk to on the college campuses. They think this is a big issue, and they relate it to too much spending. So I find this very encouraging. As a matter of fact, the first time I came across the enthusiasm on a college campus was in 2007. I was speaking at the University of Michigan's on the college campus there, right after we had a debate in Michigan on financial affairs in the last go-around. And it was there that some of the young students started shouting out, "End the Fed, end the Fed." They pulled out Federal Reserve notes and started burning Federal Reserve notes. I said, the revolution is arriving. There's something very interesting going on. And we literally can get thousands of people out. The other day we had 3,000 people out on a college campus, and they know and understand and care about the Federal Reserve System. And I think that's what has to happen, and then there will be eventually changes in Congress. But the reason I believe that there's just tremendous resistance of the special interests is I call the Federal Reserve a facilitator. It really facilitates big government. It facilitates the desires of politicians. And there is a gentleman's agreement between the two parties. Since the two parties, there's not much difference. Their rhetoric is different, and sometimes one will emphasize overseas military spending. The other one wants to emphasize endless entitlement. So they more or less have been very complementary, and they go along with it. And deficits don't matter. We have too many conservatives over the years that claim they were fiscal conservatives, but then they'd also say, well, deficits really don't matter. All we have to do is tinker with the tax code. It'll generate more revenues, and it'll solve all our problems. But deficits do matter, and they're mattering a whole lot right now because this whole idea of central banking has been the instigator, has facilitated the spending, and has papered over the debt. And this illusion and trust in paper and our dollar, it has been a great temporary benefit to us, but on long term it's very, very detrimental. Because the biggest thing that I think we face in the world today financially is this huge debt that the world is suffering from. And I believe debt is the big problem. And it's not a lack of revenues from the government. So if we ever got serious about this, we have to cut spending. And that's where the resistance is. I don't think there's any serious talk on the Hill. I don't think a super committee is anywhere close. I don't think any of the alternatives over there are anywhere thinking about the seriousness of this, because they talk about cutting $1 trillion. Yeah, over 10 years. The only thing that counts is next year, the next year's budget. What are you going to do? So I have a modest suggestion. And my position is that if we were serious about this and we were concerned and thought we had to do something about it, the Congress should cut $1 trillion in the first year. I think that would be a pretty good starter, and get back to living within our means. But we also have to address the subject of the inflation. Today, the big talk about on the campaign trail around the country and on the Hill is the unemployment problem. People want jobs, and they say 9% unemployment, 9% unemployment. And the people feel a lot in the country feel a lot worse than 9% unemployment. That's serious. But once again, they fudge the figures. There's no reason to fully trust everything our government tells us, especially when things are going badly, whether it's on foreign policy or monetary policy, because they use the fear tactic to frighten people into, boy, yeah, the whole world's going to collapse unless we bail out the big banks and the big corporations. Yes, if we don't invade Iraq, there's going to be a Holocaust and they're going to attack us and drop bombs on us. And that is endless, the endless fear-mongering to scare the people and the Congress into spending money. Now, if you didn't have a Federal Reserve, it would come to a halt. It wouldn't happen. If you weren't able to monetize debt, you weren't always to have this backstop in saying, well, if you haven't taxed enough and you can't borrow anymore, what would happen if you couldn't monetize debt? Interest rates would go up. And the Congress would say, hey, we have to watch it. We're taking too much out of the economy. So this has been such a grand deception. In the short run, we tend to do better, especially as a reserve currency. We've been able to buy goods from overseas dirt cheap and have policies, whether they're trade policies, regulatory policies, and tax policies. We can chase all our productive businesses overseas. So we end up with an economy that isn't producing. We end up with a nation deeply in debt, and there's no willingness to admit the truth and decide to change things, and Congress is not in any position really to rein in the Fed. Now, some people claim, well, we need to change the mandate of the Fed. Well, since I don't like the Fed, I'm not interested in worrying about what the mandate should be, because they're not going to do it anyway. I mean, their mandate is that they're supposed to have full employment. They're failing there. They're supposed to have stable prices. They're failing there. So why do we have any trust whatsoever in what they do? And besides, deep down in their hearts, their goal is to accomplish liquidation of debt, because the debt is too big. They know that, we know that, but they don't want to default and just not be able to pay the interest rates. They're not going to do that. Governments of our size and with debt of this size, the default always comes. The market is demanding a default. The market wants deflation. The market insists on that. Politicians and the Federal Reserve say, no, we have to inflate. But they do recognize that you have to liquidate the debt and, of course, the malinvestment as well. But their goal is to liquidate debt with inflation. And that's not too hard to understand, that if they can get a 50% inflation rate in a year or two, that takes our $15 trillion debt and cuts it in half. And that is their goal. And they're pretty upfront about this. Paul Krugman happens to be have views quite different than mine. On occasion now, will mention my name in his articles, but he says Ron Paul has it absolutely wrong. He worries about inflating the money supply, increasing the money supply as being inflationary. He says that can't happen. Not in a weak economy, not when you're in recession. It won't cause prices to go up. Well, it seems to me like he doesn't remember much of history, even our own history, of the 1970s. They came up and the Keynesians were dumbfounded. They say, what's going on here? This is not supposed to happen. Oh, I guess we'll call this stagflation. Well, how about inflationary depressions? That's happened quite a few times. And why he would think that it's totally immune here, I'm not quite sure. But Bernanke, though, has given us an indication of his explanation of why we have the problem. So this is the reason we shouldn't worry too much, because I'm very pleased that he has to hold press conferences. That means he's on the defensive right now, and I'm very pleased with that. But on the last one, when they were pressing him a little bit about why aren't you having more success, in his explanation, he's been unlucky. So it's boiled down to being whether you're lucky or not. Well, I don't think it's bad luck. I think it's bad policy. I think he's dealing with a system that is not viable. All it is it's a deception. It's sort of like a drug. You get some benefits and you keep using it. Run up debt, run up inflation, monetize the debt, make a bigger bubble. But just like a drug addiction, the drug addict feels better when he keeps getting drug. An alcoholic feels better. But if you don't do something about it, you kill the patient. And right now, the patient is very, very big, and that's the worldwide economy. This is a big issue, and yet I think they're totally in denial. They're not willing to admit the truth, and they think that they can doctor this up and manipulate it and work on it. So what should we do about all this? Well, my big picture of what we should do is bigger than just the Federal Reserve. Is that we as a people ought to ask the question: what should the role of government be? And does the Constitution have any meaning? Today, on the Hill, whether it's any of the three branches of government, the Constitution really is down to the point has no meaning. So we have to decide whether the rule of law is worth something, and then we as a people have to decide what should the role of government be. Well, we followed the Constitution. The Constitution was written to restrain the federal government, and if you wanted government, it was supposed to be more local. But there were some mandates in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 tells us what the government is supposed to be able to do, and certainly we should have a strong national defense. But it also said something very strong about the monetary issue. Only gold and silver could be legal tender. That's never been repealed. There's no authority for a central bank. So just following the Constitution would get us back, in a much better position. But the purpose of government for me is the protection of liberty. And I see the Federal Reserve as the facilitator in the undermining of that liberty and the enhancement of big government. But the longer the bubble lasts, I think the worse the suffering will be. But what can we do? I've written as far back as the Gold Commission, the case for gold. But even in that dissent, I took the position that I wouldn't close the Federal Reserve down in one day. The Federal Reserve will close themselves down eventually when they destroy the money. But I don't want that to happen, either closing it down in one day or waiting for a collapse of this whole system. So my idea is sort of a copy of what Hayek had talked about. Why don't we denationalize money, legalize competition, allow free markets to work, allow free market bankings to work? Maybe we could hold the feet to the fire of the bankers to not commit fraud and counterfeiting. Today, fraud and counterfeiting is accepted. We allow our government to do this, and the Congress does nothing. So I think we should legalize competition in currencies, which means that first we recognize the Constitution, we repeal the legal tender laws, but I don't think you can tax money in order to have a competing currency. So what we should do is take the taxes off silver and gold, and even allow private mints to issue gold. An individual not too long ago did that. He issued some coinage, and he was arrested. He was charged with counterfeiting as well as terrorism, and had all his gold and silver stolen. And it wasn't like he was doing it in secret like somebody would if he were counterfeiting. He was doing it in the wide open, it was wide open, yet the government does not want competition. This is to me the most important step that we could make. I have a bill in 1098 which actually legalizes competition, and we would have to address the subject of fractional reserve banking. I think the fractional reserve banking and the pyramiding of debt is atrocious on what we put up with, and there is a disagreement in libertarian circles exactly what you do with fractional reserve banking in a free market. Anywhere from what Rothbard had said to others who would say, let the market decide as long as it's up front and you're not lying to people and you don't commit fraud. And but that is a small argument compared to whether or not we should have competition in currencies and allow something else to circulate. Currencies circulate all the time around the world. It wouldn't be a big problem. So I believe in a short period of time we will be forced into making these decisions, and there are others, I'm sure, thinking about it, and they would like to internationalize something different than the dollar reserve standard. They'd like to have another fiat currency and maybe a pretend alliance with gold, but they want to move the control into the IMF and the World Bank. I think that would be a disaster. I think what we need is just the restoration of the principles of liberty, defend our Constitution, and say free markets are more important. The government should be there to make sure that that functions and that property rights are protected and contract rights are protected. This monetary issue would not be that major if we allowed some competition to come in. Right now, though, we have a long way to go on that. But once again, I want to thank you for the invitation today and appreciate very much being here. Thank you.